adjustments are also indicated on the table below, that is table 3. But basically, what we are beginning to bring out is that the impact of the withdrawal of the finance bill is extremely heavy on us as a country. Now, what are the expenditure projections? On paragraph 17, projections have been revised to 3.8 trillion. That is 21.4% of GDP. And this comprises a recurrent of about 2.8 billion, 15.7% of GDP, and the development of expenditure now drops to Kenya shillings 579 billion. That is only 3.2% of GDP. That, Mr. Chairman, is the development expenditure, just 3.2% of GDP. That is a very, very big hit. The total allocation of shareable revenue to county government is projected at 410.9 billion Kenya shillings. That is 2.3% of GDP, which is inclusive of the 30.8, the carryover that I referred to. And then we have an allocation to the contingency fund of 4 billion. Mr. Chairman, at paragraph 18, because you will notice that the expenditure, even though we have gone cut back, but there's a financing deficit that is now arising. This fiscal deficit, including grants, has been revised to Kenya shillings 761 billion, that is 4.2% of GDP, in the financial year 2024-2025. Before the withdrawal of the Finance Bill, the Finance Act, the projection here was about 3.2% of GDP as the fiscal deficit, but now it has had to widen. This fiscal deficit will be financed by net borrowing of 356.4 billion, that is 2% of GDP, and net domestic borrowing of 404.6 billion, 2.2% of GDP. The overall gross change in the financial year 2024-25 national government budget, Mr. Chairman, again is indicated in table 4. The overall gross change in the financial year 2024-25 budget is a reduction of 121.8 billion, which reflects 1.9%, which is within the provisions of Article 223 of the Constitution. Mr. Chairman, your committee, through you, raised some very specific questions to be responded to. And now under page 10, I want to try and just briefly summarize. The detail is in the document, but I'll try and summarize the highlights of the questions that you did raise. This was while inviting us to comment on these supplementary estimates. So question number 1 was, what are the growth prospects for the financial year 2024-25 amid the prevailing uncertain economic environment? Mr. Chairman, the Kenyan economy is currently unwinding from the effects of negative and persistent global domestic shocks that have pushed the economy to its lowest activity level. The shocks included COVID-19 pandemic and effects of climate change, from the prolonged drought in 2021 to the floods in 2024. These shocks escalated the cost of essential household commodities. They also pushed up fuel prices and led to a rapid depreciation of the Kenya shilling exchange rate, thus piling pressure on public debt. Mr. Chairman, through focused policy interventions and structural reforms, the government efforts have started to yield some positive results. The economy grew by 5.6% in 2023, up from 4.9% in 2022, a demonstration of resilience and the sustenance of economic recovery. This growth momentum has continued into 2024, with the economy expanding by 5% in the first quarter, and it is projected to grow by 5.5% by the end of the year. This growth is largely driven by a strong rebound in the agricultural sector, which benefited from favorable weather conditions after 2 years of severe droughts. Additionally, service sectors remained resilient, with tourism, transport, real estate, financial, and ICT services supporting growth. Private domestic demand is expected to remain resilient even as the public sector consolidates further, while providing support for government initiatives aimed to benefit people at the bottom of the income pyramid. Mr. Chairman, this strong growth will be reinforced by ongoing interventions under the bottom-up economic transformation. The better objectives are bringing down the cost of living, eradicating hunger, creating jobs, expanding the tax base, improving foreign exchange balances, and inclusive growth. The MTP4 adopted a value chain approach with the better core pillars and key enablers clustered under 5 sectors, that is finance and production, infrastructure, social, environment and natural resources, and governance and public administration. Economic growth over the medium term will be driven by raising agricultural productivity, transforming the micro, small, and medium enterprise economy, increasing investment in housing and settlement, strengthening healthcare through universal health coverage, and investing in the digital superhighway and creative economy. Mr. Chairman, let me draw members to paragraph 25. That is on inflation. Inflation is now firmly under control at 4.6% in June 2024, from 7.9% in 2023, and a peak of 9.6% in October 2022, due to easing of food and energy prices. The appreciating shilling produced a strong pass-through effect to lower domestic prices, supported by a tight monetary policy stance and interventions by government in providing subsidized fertilizer and seeds, which continue to lower the cost of food production, but also revitalize agricultural production. Inflation is projected to remain within the target band over the medium term. Mr. Chairman, as you know, the target band is between 2.5 up to 7.5. Tight monetary policy to stabilize inflation has led to rising interest rates and a slowdown in the growth of the private sector credit. The interbank rate increased to 13.3% in June 2024, compared to 9.6% in June 2023, while the 91-day Treasury bills rate increased to 16% from 11.5% over the same period, thereby increasing the cost of borrowing by government from the domestic market. So, Mr. Chairman, the flip side is that when we don't have revenue, then government has to borrow. So the interest rates are beginning to rise in the domestic market because now the government is beginning to re-enter into that space. Commercial bank lending to the private sector declined to grow by 4.5% in April 2024 and 7.9% in March 2024, down from 13.2% in March 2023. This has had negative effects on private sector activities. The consequences of fighting supply-driven inflation is that it has negative effects on economic vibrancy in the short term. So basically, we are living in a dangerous situation where we are beginning to slow down the private sector from a trajectory that was picking up. Mr. Chairman, the current account balance or the current account deficit improved to 3.9% of GDP in the 12 months to April 2024, down from 4.7% of GDP in a similar period in 2023. And this was supported by 7.7% decline in goods imported, reflecting lower imports across all categories except machinery and transport equipment. Here you can also say that we benefited from the increased food production, and therefore there was less of food imports. Our exports increased by 2.9%, reflecting increased exports of agricultural commodities and re-exports. Mr. Chairman, tourism receipts rebounded faster than anticipated to their pre-COVID-19 levels. Tourist arrivals improved by 27.2% in the 12 months to March 2024, compared to a similar period in 2023. So that was a real good show from the tourism sector. Mr. Chairman, remittances increased by 12.8% to US dollars 4.5 billion in the 12 months to May 2024, compared to 3.997 billion over a similar period in 2023. This increased Forex inflows into the country. Some went to investment while others supported household consumption. That means there's a very strong growth in the diaspora remittances. Mr. Chairman, tight policies and flexible exchange rates, coupled with initiatives to attract foreign direct investment and enhance export performance, are anticipated to help stabilize the current account deficit around 4% of GDP in the medium term. So whatever we do, we must make sure that we are not chasing away foreign direct investment as a nation. Mr. Chairman, our foreign exchange reserves, the official foreign exchange reserves, which stood at 7.8 billion US dollars, that is an import cover of 4 months, 4.1 to be precise, was available up to May 2024. And this continues to provide adequate cover and a buffer against any short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. The exchange rate to the dollar has stabilized in the range of 128 to 131 since February 2024. The exchange rate to the dollar stood at 129.5 by end June 2024, from an all-time high of 160.8 by end of January 2024. Through the repayment of the 2024 Eurobond, the government successfully removed the investor uncertainty, and market perception improved significantly. The appreciation and stability of the exchange rate has created confidence and triggered inflows of foreign direct investment and attracted investors to the Nairobi Securities Exchange. This appreciation has helped to reduce debt service costs, improve performance of domestic borrowing, and stabilize interest rates. Mr. Chairman, the technical people will be able to give some greater light on the actual numbers around the debt that we have settled, public debt, particularly external. I think it's important that this comes out so that Kenyans can appreciate the magnitude of this challenge we are facing. Now, you did ask a question, Mr. Chairman, also around the risks to the macroeconomic outlook. Now, under paragraph 30, the situation is as this. The outlook is subject to elevated uncertainty because of domestic and external risks. On the domestic side, the risks relate to the following. 1, unpredictable weather conditions due to the impact of climate change, which could resume food insecurity issues and therefore inflation pressures that may dampen growth. 2, the tight fiscal space due to the impact of the multiple shocks that have affected the global and domestic economy might lead to tight liquidity conditions for financing the budget. And 3, because this is very realistic now, the ongoing demonstrations are causing great risk to economic activities, including collection of revenue, the impacting on the tourism sector, and disruption in businesses. So what is going on is having a very, very serious impact on the economy, and even these supplementary figures we are working on, if this persists, the country will be forced to look again for further haircuts and further adjustments. On the external front, uncertainties in the global economy, the economic outlook stemming from the escalating geopolitical fragmentations could result in higher commodity prices that pose a risk to domestic inflation outcomes, leading to further tightening of financial conditions. Mr. Chairman, these external uncertainties, for instance, and the conflicts, right now, there's no free navigation in the Red Sea. About 40% of the traffic that goes through the Red Sea has been scuttled because of that conflict. And they are forcing maritime operators to take the longer route, and this is beginning to feed into the economy and the prices in our place. There's also the continued strengthening of the US dollar against the global currencies arising from aggressive monetary policy tightening presents significant risks to financial flows and puts pressures on the exchange rate with implications on growth and inflation. So basically also how the other economies are responding is going to have an impact on our economy. Question 2, you wanted to know the implication of the proposed reductions in development expenditure on the better priorities and ultimately growth. Mr. Chairman, the National Assembly approved 270.9 billion Kenya shillings on account of better priorities while approving the financial year 2024-25 budget estimates. Out of this amount, 250 billion has been ring-fenced. The National Treasury will endeavor to prioritize better funded projects in the financial year 2024 budget and medium term. Question 3, you wanted a detailed fiscal framework for the financial year 2024 and 2025 and the medium term. Mr. Chairman, the financial year 2024-25 fiscal framework has been revised to reflect the changes in the financial year 2024-25 expenditure estimates, and we have provided in the folder before you a detailed fiscal framework which has an attachment of Annex 1A and 1B to respond to that issue. So I'll draw members to the annexes in the document. Question 4, you wanted to know the basis and criteria informing the sectors or areas where the budget has been rationalized. Mr. Chairman, the National Assembly approved the Finance Bill 2024 on 25th June 2024. However, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya declined to assent to the Finance Bill 2024. The Finance Bill was meant to create additional resources amounting to 344.3 billion. The withdrawal of the said bill created a financing gap of a similar amount in order to align the financial year 2024-25 budget estimates. We have rationalized the budget estimates by 178.3 billion Kenya shillings in the following manner. Recurrent budget rationalization. In the recurrent budget, we are proposing to rationalize expenditure amounting to 40.3 billion Kenya shillings. This amount is inclusive of 2.7 billion rationalization under Parliament, $500 million under the judiciary. The rationalization targeted non-priority areas in the recurrent budget, as well as rationalization of salary adjustments for civil servants and teachers. B, rationalization of personnel emoluments. Mr. Chairman, we propose to rationalize allocations for Phase 2, salary adjustments for teachers and civil servants amounting to 15 billion Kenya shillings. This comprises Kenya shillings 10 billion for salary adjustment for teachers and 5 billion for civil servants. And B, rationalization of offices of First Lady and spouse to the Deputy President and advisors under the Presidency. Mr. Chairman, as directed, we have rationalized 1.525 billion from the offices of the First Lady and the spouse to the Deputy President after exempting allocations for salaries to employees and advisors under the Presidency. The current items are indicated in detail in Table 5. That gives you the percentage of cuts and all the areas that have been affected. Table 5 on page 17. On the development budget rationalization, Mr. Chairman, we propose to rationalize the development budget with the exemption of GOK counterpart funding, as well as critical ongoing projects. We rationalized projects by 138.5 billion from Government of Kenya funded projects. This includes 8.3 billion from the NG-CDF and Kenya shillings 1 billion from Parliament and Kenya shillings 800 million from the judiciary. And some of the affected areas I'll come to shortly, I will highlight. But I just want to point out that when we say exemption to GOK counterpart funding, honorable members, I know you're familiar with it, but the general public may not be familiar with the whole idea of why, what we mean by counterpart funding here. This is where there's supposed to be a Government of Kenya contribution, and then the rest of the money comes from the donor that is funding that particular project. Now, some of the major areas affected by rationalization of the development budget include the following. And I had highlighted some earlier, but let me repeat. 14.1 billion for roads projects, 14.6 billion for electrification, that is the last mile and public facilities, 6.5 billion for water and sanitation, 6.5 for police modernization, 3.3 billion for settlement of the landless, 3.1 billion for construction and equipping TVET institutes, 5.2 billion school infrastructure, 3.3 university infrastructure, and 2 billion the University Hustlers Fund. Mr. Chairman, you had question 5, and you wanted a detailed list of the public participation projects affected by the budget rationalization. Mr. Chairman, the National Assembly approved Kenya shillings 2.3 billion for public participation projects under various ministries, departments, and agencies in the financial year 2024-25 budget estimates. Out of this amount, 1.5 billion has been rationalized, and the details are again in your folder as captured in Annex 2. You have question 6. You required a detailed list of the financial year 2023-2024 carryovers by each ministry, department, and agencies. Mr. Chairman, we closed the financial year 2023-2024 with carryovers amounting to 218.5 billion, and these are indicated on Table 6 in your folder at page 19. Now, Mr. Chairman, I think there are some indications of the highlights with that Kenya has with the International Monetary Fund program. I'll try and go through them very briefly, and then if there are details, again, the team is here to respond. But, Mr. Chairman, I think I may want to flag one thing, that when we talk about the IMF, I think it's important for the Kenyan out there to know that we are members of this institution. We are also members of the World Bank. Because we tend to talk to them or talk of them as if they are aliens. But it is important for the Kenyan people to know that in simple language, we are subscribers or shareholders within these institutions. I think that's the simple language I would want to communicate to the Kenyan public, because we tend to talk of it as if we are not part of them and so forth, but it's important that this comes through. Now, the highlights are as follows. Mr. Chairman, we have just concluded the 7th review of our program with the IMF. Based on our preliminary assessment, we met the end June 2024 quantitative performance criteria, targets on net international reserves, basically including no new domestic guarantees and present value of contracting or guaranteeing of new external debt, and the continuous of ensuring that there are no new external payment arrears. So basically there were targets of various quantitative performance criteria, including, and you can see that, making sure that we minimize the accumulation of external arrears, which means the government of Kenya had to make sure it's paying promptly. We, however, did not meet the end June 2024 criteria on the primary budget balance and tax revenue, for which we have sought waiver based on commitment to pursue fiscal consolidation. And this is, of course, compounded by the fact that the Finance Act is now not there. So clearly, the issues around the projected tax revenues and so forth can no longer stand as they were. We had other targets, which, Mr. Chairman, I think in the interest of time, maybe I'll just highlight they are technical in nature, but we had targets which maybe I can just focus in addition around the tax area. The main fiscal quantitative performance criteria targets for the financial year 2024-25 are 1 billion primary surplus of 240.2 billion ordinary revenue and 2.6 billion tax revenue. In addition, we have the following indicative targets. We need to collect 2.3 billion, and we have to stop accumulation of pending bills. But this now will not be a reality as we go forward. We also have to minimize accumulation of exchequer requests, and we have to focus on spending priorities that have a proper impact socially. So, Mr. Chairman, the issues around the IMF, maybe look at paragraph 44, because the others are largely technical, and I'm trying to leave that to the committee to look at. The following benchmarks were not met and have now been rescheduled to be completed in the near term. 1, cabinet approval of strategy options for restructuring Kenya Airways by end of April. This was rescheduled to end July 2024. We also have to get cabinet approval and publication of an updated inventory and a new classification of state corporations that will apply across the government in line with the National Treasury strategy for improving financial oversight at state corporations document. You know, Mr. Chairman, as we deal with the state corporations, we make progress on one side and we have challenges on the other. For instance, the government publishes some guidelines on how to handle state corporations. Somebody runs to court and stops that, and yet those are very critical benchmarks also in helping the country come out of the challenges that we are facing. The National Treasury, amongst other things, is also supposed to submit to Parliament legal amendments to anchor the state corporation's ownership policy and other states-owned enterprise blueprint measures so that they can be put into law. We also have a situation where the National Treasury and Ministry of Energy need to provide and publish an assessment of the governance structure of the petroleum development entity. And Mr. Chairman, I want to say that in spite of all these challenges, the Treasury has had a very robust engagement with the International Monetary Fund, even in the midst of the challenges we've been facing. And the government has submitted for approval to the IMF Executive Board our program, our economic policies and programs, and we know that the IMF board will be meeting at the end of August 2024, and it is our desire and hope that Kenya's proposition will receive favorable consideration so that we can move beyond the challenges we are facing. Finally, Mr. Chairman, let me thank you once again for this opportunity to engage with you on the financial year 2024-25 supplementary estimates number 1. The National Treasury and Economic Planning is ready to provide any additional information, documentation required by the National Assembly to facilitate the approval of the financial year 2024-25 supplementary estimates. Thank you. I beg to end there for now.
Thank you very much, Prime Cabinet Secretary, His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi, for that very detailed presentation. I could see members were following in the files, and I am sure they have a lot of issues that would want some engagement with you. But I would request members, before we proceed, that I give the PS, Dr. Kipto, a chance also to say something around the issues that we are discussing on the economy and where we are as a country, and especially given the situations that we are facing.
Thank you, Chair and honorable members. Just to add to what the Prime Cabinet Secretary has read, who is also acting as my Cabinet Secretary, just want to say that there's been good progress on the macroeconomic front since we settled the Eurobond in February with an issuance and a buyback of 1.5 billion. And we have been able to stabilize the shilling, as read by the Cabinet Secretary. Now the shilling is at around 129, 130, and we have seen inflation decline by 5% from 9.6 in October 2022 to now around 4.6, and that means cost of living has in a big way also been tackled, because food inflation and fuel inflation is now declined in a big way. And that stability in the foreign exchange market has also demonstrated in Kenya. Participation of investors at the stock exchange. So far, from a macro front, especially on inflation and the exchange rate, I think it's good. Of course, interest rates remain high, and that is also driven more by the fiscal front, where we have not been able to collect enough revenues as planned. We crossed the year with 220 billion exchequer requests, which we could not pay because what KRA collected was not enough. And that includes what we have carried over in the budget, the CDF of 13.5 billion. It also includes for counties about 31 billion, and for pension around 31 billion, which has been reduced to around 26 billion now. So I think you will see that in the budget policy statement which we issued for public participation, our expenditure was 4.2 trillion, but which we worked very hard to try and reduce that to 3.992, which is the budget we submitted end of the year. So there was already a cut of over 200 billion, which is why when you look at the cut, that table that Prime CS showed you on expenditure cuts, you will see, for instance, communication supplies and services is now being cut only by 20%. It's not because we are leaving out this. It's because the earlier cuts had affected more on domestic travel, foreign travel, and other recurrent expenditure which we found necessary. But even with having cut that budget to 3.992, the failure to assent to the finance bill by the president meant that we had to cut back again the expenditure. The instructions we had, if you listen to the president that time when he did not assent, was that we cut the budget by the equivalent of what we did not realize in the finance bill. But having gone through, we of course had to do what the Prime Cabinet Secretary has indicated. We had to set aside some of the critical items, what are important for this government, as tabulated already in the list that was given. And we were able to ring fence up to 165 billion exemptions, as you see on page 4. And but this is a big cut of development. And I have been receiving calls from my colleagues, accounting officers, virtually everybody complaining of huge budget cuts. I have never seen this. It is unprecedented. It's a place, as a technical person at the National Treasury, I wouldn't like Kenya to be in. I seek that we find ways to get out of this quickly, to get back to normalcy. Because with so many contracts already in place, and you don't allocate budget, it means we'll have challenges of contractual obligations, potential litigation in court, and that is not good for us. It is important we provide the budget. And the fact that we don't have also money being spent by government, it means liquidity in the market will decline. And all the gains we have achieved are likely to be undermined. So I wanted just to say it has been a good opportunity for us at National Treasury to, this crisis has helped us to look at the expenditure side and address on a permanent basis some of the areas we feel could have been areas of waste. But I think the pendulum has swung too much, to the extent that I think we have cut to almost everyone and is unable to perform. So the solution could have been more expenditure cuts. But if you look at what you have there, if you do some maths, we have a budget of 3.83 trillion. Is it 3.7? 3.87 trillion, out of which recurrent is 2.8. Of that 2.8 trillion of recurrent, what we call CFS, Consolidated Fund Services, is 1.2 trillion. And if you take the revenues that are estimated in what you see there of ordinary revenue of 2.6 trillion, it means we are spending 45% of the revenues we get from KRA to just pay interest for loans that we have taken, and a bit on, if you isolate the pension, actually we are saying for every 4 shillings we are getting from KRA, we are spending to pay debt. So one of our biggest problems is the stock of debt that we have, which is piling up, because in the fiscal framework, the assumption is that you keep rolling over on the domestic debt, even when you pay interest payment. We have just settled now, today, we have paid 60, how much is it? 74 billion shillings that we have paid out of the revenues we had to accumulate to settle the Chinese debt. This month, and no, actually today is when we were paying off to settle the Chinese debt of 56 billion. And you can get other details for the rest of that make up to 74 billion. So debt is what has taken huge amount, and this explains why with less areas of expenditure, especially on recurrent, where we can't cut recurrent, and then development, you have seen how much you have done, then you have debt that piles up. The only way to grow our economy is to try and work on the revenue side, which is why there's been a lot of effort to push KRA to raise more money, tax money. And we are also working on non-tax revenue. And this debate, especially on finance bill, I think also is going to help Kenyans to now understand, because it seems to be there's always confusion between an appropriation bill and a finance bill, so that when we present a budget and you have a finance bill, one might want to say we don't need a finance bill. We needed the additional revenue because this year is different from last year. The children that have gone to school this year are more, so we're required to give more money to the children who have gone to school, and other needs because of the increase in population. So I think what I would only plead is we need to find ways to get back quickly so that we collect the revenues that we require so that our country can move in a normal way and we do well like the other countries, because I think we are a work in progress as a country, and we are a great country, potential, with a lot of resilience. Even with the challenges we have, we still are growing. Our growth is now 5.6, and despite all the challenges, if we only brought in the normalcy, I think we will do well. So on the side, under the CS and others, we are pushing KRA on tax administration. You have seen we have also extended the tax amnesty, which will give us a revenue about 30 billion. We have RMLF, which now we are saying it should come to exchequer, because this is important to support the revenues for us. And then we have done a lot of SOE reforms, which we expect to raise to reduce the expenditure by about 7.3 billion. And all these are important reforms that require the support of Kenyans. So maybe I'll stop here for now, and it is my wish and the wish of us in Treasury colleagues that we have Kenyans support the process of budget making and the collection of revenues as required. We have also learned our lessons, and we will do more engagement. We will improve our communication. I think we have agreed we'll do regular updates every maybe 1 month or 2 months, where we inform the nation on where we are on many areas of economic activity, and probably also do more. I think we are telling KRA to do more education and awareness so that people see what the value for paying taxes. And I think Kenyans are right when they ask how their money is being used. That's a legitimate question. And we encourage Parliament and everybody to ask us of how we have used the money. But let us get the revenues required for us to run the budget for the nation. Thank you very much.
Members, I know there is a lot of interest. What we'll do is we'll take the first round of 5 members. Then the National Treasury answers, then we continue like that. And then on the team of the National Treasury, we request that you note them down so that we answer them in wholesale. One, let me start from here. Over the last 3 days, we have noted also something that should be corrected. And by the way, the Prime Cabinet Secretary, most of the issues you'll hear from these members, they are generally to enrich. We've had a lot of questions also asking ourselves on how to improve our economy, and therefore whatever things you are going to hear, some are actually opinions as much as they are also answers, they are questions, because you also want to be a part of the solution. And in that regard, you realize Kenya being the informal economy it is, I mean a lot of activities happening informally, then there is a lot of levies and fees to collect beyond the taxes in terms of targets. And we have noted one thing that is very peculiar, which the National Treasury should take note of. Now that there is a squeeze in terms of exchequer, almost all the other departmental committees with sagas below them, all of them are requesting for enhancement of A&A. Enhancement of A&A meaning they are just requesting for them to be allowed to spend more, meaning there is a lot of space in that area. Look, for example, tourism fund, tourism promotion fund. This report indicates our tourism numbers have risen by close to 30%. But then there is nothing commensurate to show that the A&A being gotten from this enhancement in tourism, that this money is going into helping some of the problems that we have. And our advice as the committee is this: A&A must stop being the preserve of the collector. This is public money. Whether you call it sports fund, whether you call it tourism promotion fund, whether you call it tourism fund, these are Kenyans' money. Because then we have seen some kind of empire building, where because you have collected A&A, you want to look for expenditure to utilize that A&A. Treasury must initiate at this process, taking care of the current situation you are in. You must initiate changes in law. I know it's our work, but also you know what to do as a National Treasury. We open up the fund of tourism. We open up a sports fund. We open up all the other funds, including the one for CA, that this money cannot continue to be constrained to be used for specific purposes. SOEs is the same. The only detail we have as a committee is transfer to this agency. But the truth of the matter is that PSN, you know, civil servants in Kenya are not the problem when it comes to recurrent expenditure. The problem is neither the people seated in this hall. They could be, but they are a little problem. The bigger problem is SOEs, state-owned enterprises and parastatus. We must find a way of getting the fresh out. Just the same way everyone has gotten a haircut, it cannot continue being that the budget making process, so to say, of Kenya Pipeline, of Kenya Ports Authority, of all the other cash-rich agencies, that the board, that it stops with the board. It cannot continue to be like that. And I want you to check something called IRA, Insurance Regulatory Authority. And if it's possible, because it lies under the National Treasury, tell us how much is the money an employee per, how much money is allocated per employee in that agency, for example. How much surplus do they remit to the National Treasury? So that we continue now providing a solution to the lack of money by first of all taking the money that is low-lying fruit. Second thing is I want you to tell this committee also, PS, whether we are within the constitutional threshold when it comes to development expenditure and the entire budget. What it is provided in the law, whether we are within. The other thing is public participation projects. As the National Treasury, you are aware, that is usually non-negotiable. because Kenyans have already proposed these projects. They are waiting for them, and therefore the haircut of 1.5 billion cannot be permitted. And therefore, before you leave, please identify for us whether we are cutting from the National Treasury or whichever other place, because this money has to be availed today. And lastly, taxes. If you have this, you can give us an answer. Kenya, I have said before, most of our activities are informal. How many Kenyans pay taxes? Vis-a-vis, so if you have the number, how many Kenyans are working? What is the working population in Kenya? And number two, how many of those pay taxes? Let me go to Honorable Vice Chair first.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just appreciate His Excellency Prime Cabinet Secretary and your team for a very good job. I have a few concerns. Let me go straight to the first one. And I think before I say that, I must say this is a very healthy conversation, Chair. And this revision of the budget and the submissions from National Treasury goes forward to allay the fears that the finance bill was still alive, the finance bill of 2024-25. So this is a confirmation that that finance bill is dead. That is why we are here revising the budget. My first one is on the impact of winding up the 47 SOEs. It's a good thing. We've saved 7.3, and I believe going forward we will save even more. But my concern is this. We've looked at some of these 47 SOEs in our various departmental committees. Some of them, their allocation have been reduced to 0. And now my concern is, whereas we're trying to save, cut down, you know, we're looking for to create more jobs, we also need to protect the existing ones. So what are the National Treasury, what are the plans? Are you designating these employees? Are you sending them to other departments? I think it would be good to know, because there's 0 allocation. Case in point is Kenya Academies of Sports. My second concern is on pending bills. You say the policy direction is no further accumulation of pending bills. But now we are wondering, how will this be possible, given that some of the deductions are on development expenditure, reductions affecting ongoing projects, some with certificates, and you've just alluded to the fact that there would even be more consequences in terms of the legal impacts arising from that. So meaning our pending bills actually will increase. So how shall we be looking at that? And my third one is on, you said our growth rate is expected to remain resilient at 5.5. Now, given the reductions on development, also looking at the impacts on the services sector, occasioned by the demonstrations, the crowding effect leading to increase in interest rates as a result of domestic borrowing that we're looking forward to, and many other factors. Do you still think that the growth rate will hold at 5.5% going to the future? And finally, we're talking about austerity measures. You have elaborated on all these initiatives and policy directions, but you've not touched on corruption, because that is one area we would save a lot of money. What are the plans? What are the strategies? How are we going to net in on corruption so that we make further savings? Thank you.
Let me go to Honorable Mayor Masara.
Thank you. First, I want to congratulate the Prime Cabinet Secretary that you have broken the record to be acting minister in almost 22 institutions. I think nobody will ever break that. Congratulations once again. And I want to remind you, I'm married at your place, so when you are writing your CV as the person who has broken the record, you remember Masara there. I wanted people to laugh because we are in interesting times. Things are very tough. My concern, first I want to appreciate how you have presented the document because it has enriched the mind of the Kenyans on the happenings, the current happenings, more so on the issue of finance bill and the budget process. I want only to invest much of our time on the carryovers. Kindly let the committee know that these carryovers, more so the ones for developments, no, for counties, were they for development or recurrent? Because if they were for development, some of which are going to attract what is called penalties. So kindly furnish us with that information. And then part of the carryovers, let us know if there were already payment certificate issued, because that one, as the Vice Chairman has said, will also increase the issue of the interest rates. My another concern is the issue of corruption. You have not mentioned as a treasury what you are going to do, but we don't have official communication. But the former president mentioned the money we were losing per day on corruption, you remember? If we can shield those loopholes, it means that money we are losing, we can get it instead of taxing Kenyans. Another issue is that you have not talked about auditing the public debts, because we are complaining about the interest we pay on public debts. But if you ask any Kenyan, including the technocrats, we don't know where this money were taken. Particularly if you want now audit, this borrowing was done in this country, it was meant for a particular project. Did that project stimulate the economy? Or is that project completed, or is it existing? We don't have such a records. And finally, you have talked of winding up of 47 parastatals. I believe they were having recurrent expenditure. Now that they are not going to be there, you have not mentioned the amount which used to be allocated to this parastatal, of which now you are not going to allocate, because we are looking for ways of ensuring that our budget is financed. So we must go for other areas where you are forgotten. And then finally, on the current development project you are projecting to do in this financial year, are they going to stimulate the economy so that the economy can grow, or there are some are political which are going to be white elephant, but the public money is going to be spent? Thank you.
Honorable Daktari, Secretary General.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the clear and precise presentation. I have one or two issues to raise. One, when you look at the areas where budget cuts have been effected, like in the area of electricity and in public facilities, that is the last mile, water and sanitation, roads, school infrastructure, and even construction of TVETs. Actually, the moment you remove money from these areas, you can easily ground the country. And so, in my proposal, why can't we have budget cuts focusing on recurrent expenditure and operations more than in the area of development, so that we raise money for development by effecting budget cuts in the area of operation? For example, there are so many areas like the mergers of parastatals, as has been said, austerity measures in various ministries that are duplicating each other. We've been in this budget committee and we've seen, for example, the commission on Nairobi River being implemented by 3 ministries, and each of them is bringing a budget here for implementing the same thing. I don't know whether you've been able to identify those duplication of roles so that we can remove money and rechannel this money in in this area. And so we can be able to raise money if we are serious. The other thing is, apart from just the normal budget presentations, has the ministry done a 3-5-year projection on austerity measures and say, within the next 4-5 years, if we actually delve into austerity measures properly, we can raise this amount and channel it to development. Finally, what is the impact of the pending bills of 2023-2024 financial year to the 2024-2025 budget? What is the fate of this carryover? Thank you, Chairman.
Let me go to Honorable Miri Mabona.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the Cabinet Secretary and the entire Treasury for a good presentation. And Chair, I just want to say that I support the budget cuts, and even though that I think we can reduce even further. I think I'm not saying just because of what is happening here. I have actually said it before in this committee, because we need to be very realistic in the way we do our budgeting. I saw a comment by one of the Gen Zs that was actually equating our national budget to our own family budgets. And if you have only 10,000 Kenya shillings and you need to do food, buy food and buy shoes, you can't do shoes and then leave food. But the way we have been budgeting is actually the opposite. We are buying shoes and leaving food. And when we do that, then there is pressure for us to increase revenue, and hence the finance, infamous finance bill. So for me, it's very important that we are more realistic, because we create an artificial need for revenue when we can actually budget as a country within our means. I know we have blamed the IMFs and all, and I'm sure they are doing wrong. But first, let us point fingers at ourselves before we point fingers even at the IMF, because there are things we can do at home that don't need to put those kind of pressure on us. Chair, the only thing, other thing I wanted to indicate is that I've seen that the Treasury has indicated areas where they need the cuts, but without premising them on certain principles. And that's why Daktari is actually going back to leave this and that. If you want to be very fair, it's always good to move on principles. And for me, one, which I've again said several in this committee, is there equity? One, in the cuts. And secondly, not only just in the cuts, but in the spreading out of the little, since we are going on austerity measures. And the Chair, I don't want to be selfish, but this is a very skeletal document, which, and if with the documents that you have on cuts, yeah, they are about from page 1 to page 9, yeah. If you are looking at the estimates, the printed estimates, they are like this voluminous, they are that big. What is the possibility that 2 projects in my constituency, for instance, would be here? That shows lack of equity. I don't mind programs in my constituency being removed for us to deal with the issues of austerity now and to deal with the crisis in the country, but there must be equity, both in cuts and also in spreading out what is remaining. Secondly, we must look at or preserve the pro-people project, the one that reaches people directly, especially Gen Zs, in terms of job creation, but also in terms of training. So if you are removing the ones that are reaching them, but we are retaining some which may not have that sort of value, it doesn't help. Then third, projects that can stimulate the economy. And Chair, for instance, there are some construction, there are ongoing constructions which you don't need. I know there are many we've removed, but there are some that I've actually seen that are there. Again, consolidating roles is another. Unfortunately, one of the areas I've seen is an area I'm very passionate about, so I will not say it, I will not mention it, but it's an area I'm very passionate about. But they have 3 different agencies doing one thing. It's a lot of wastage. And if you are serious, and that's what part of the conditionalities I think that IMF has given us, but we are going round and round like we are not able to. Again, share the issue of public participation. Because we went to the public, they told us where the issue is pinching. Let's not remove that. And finally, Chair, on a light note, you have told us that the demonstrations are keeping tourists away. But I actually think it's the opposite. If you can actually do away with the police beating demonstrators and the goons that are somehow infused, why? Because Ugandans will come here, Nigerians will come to see our Gen Zs are actually demonstrating with style, you know. They are good, they dance, they do no peaceful, no distraction, so we can actually use it to bring more tourists. So just be nice to the Gen Zs. Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Chris Aseka, member for Quisero.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, PCS, and I want to declare some interest. PCS is my political father. We only parted ways when he declared an earthquake.
So umeharibika afterwards.
No, when he declared an earthquake, I thought maybe it would bring down the whole world. I didn't know that it was a political earthquake. But it's good to know that he's brought me up in politics. I have to. I may not be an authority in economics, but I think the technical people from Treasury are. When you reduce a budget by a whopping 138 billion from development expenditures, what it means that you are reducing economic activities in the economy. The net effect is that the collections will be down and the economy will not grow. The PS has alluded to them, but I don't know if the PS interacted with this document before it was brought to the National Assembly. Two, when you reduce domestic travels, it means you are affecting service industry in the entire country. The net effect is that the economy will not grow. I agree with my Vice Chair. How do you expect to grow this economy by 5.5%? Two, you have indicated that you are trying to encourage direct foreign investment in this country. We've had reports that many investors are fleeing out of Kenya to our neighboring countries. What could be the reasons? And from where you see Treasury, is there a strategy you put in place to really attract this direct foreign investment? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable David Ochieng.
Chair, thank you so much, and thank you so much, PCS and the PS Treasury. Got a couple of questions. The first one is, Chair, the finance bill that everyone keeps talking about, where did it come from? Treasury or State House? What is your role in it? Because everyone's trying to wash their hands off it. It now became Parliament's baby. And there are things there that were brought in the last Finance Act as remedies to situations that we had at that time. For example, we reduced taxation on cooking oil. We were proposing to increase it in this budget. We reduced, in the finance bill, we reduced the price of bread. We were all of a sudden increasing it. The motor vehicle tax, and all these things. Where did these proposals come from? Thank you so much. Because it is the elephant in the room. The last financial year, 2023-24, the finance bill was quite top heavy. And we were told that if you just pass this finance bill, if you just allow this housing levy and all these things, they will have revenues. But the reports we are now getting is that the returns from the 2023-24 Finance Act are not what we projected. What went wrong? Why are we not able to harness the gains we made in the Finance Act 23-24? Number two, the KRA reforms.
Because, Chair, as you would know, and we've been told, this is not conjecture, there are KRA staff who are running mini KRAs. We've been told through the media so many times the fact that the KRA could actually collect more than what they are collecting now by half, meaning they could collect 1.5 of what they are collecting now. Why must we mix KRA reforms with the finance bill? Why can't we just pick out the reforms we need to work on KRA? If it is corruption, if it is systems, if it is the people, because we are losing money in that regard. I personally believe, and I still believe to date, we did not need a finance bill this financial year. If we had done the reforms we required, the finance bill of this year would have been reducing the burden on Kenyans. Because you told us very clearly last year that this is the silver bullet. Chair, our fiscal policy, environment and framework, in the last 18 months, 24 months, we seem to be playing ping pong with the economic policy. No one knows whether next year we'll have another tax hikes on areas that promote investments. There's no certainty. There's no predictability. How do we convince people to come into this market if next year again we'll have the kind of thing happening today? People going to the streets because the gains we've made in the previous finance acts and finance bills are being eroded by doing the right things we should be doing. Chair, I would like to know how the Treasury is working with the Office of the Auditor General. Because that office has flagged so many things the last 1 year. The areas where you're losing money in the counties at the national government level. Issues of accountability by CDF committees in the constituencies, the various ministries and the parastatals. What is being done to ensure that that is available is being used the right way, so that the measures we are now proposing, the austerity measures we are now proposing, are able to make us have some gains in that. And finally, just following up on what Honorable Millie has said, in these cuts, and I say this is a very heavy cut, a very heavy hat. In these cuts, there is almost a clear pattern that in the cuts you are making, the MPs who voted no are being targeted in their constituencies. What do you have to say about that? Thank you.
Let me go to Honorable Ruth. I was almost saying AU, but I realized I read something that something is happening.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Treasury, and especially our Prime Cabinet Secretary, who is somebody I know very well, very good friend. I'm happy to have this opportunity to at least ask a few questions. First of all, what I would like to say is how sincere are we with this kind of budget cuts? For me, these budget cuts I see are mostly targeting actually the common mwananchi. Because when you look at it, you talk about maintaining affordable housing. Yet, we are having cuts on TVETs. And many of these TVETs were there to help support our young people to go to these colleges to be able to work within this affordable housing that we were saying. When you look at the pending, when you say you have cuts on some of the development projects, which means we are going to increase even the pending bills that we have. And those pending bills, really, as I'm speaking to you right now, contractors are really suffering. Not only in the national government projects, but even the county governments, because they're not being paid. And now there's these measures of maybe having even extra pending bills because of these cuts that you're actually bringing up. What are we going to do? Because how was it informed? Within this short period, have you looked? When I look at it, there are projects that are there that were under public participation of areas that had floods. And these floods, we are saying we want gambions. We want the flood mitigations to be done. And you're cutting those mercilessly across. Yet we are going to still have the floods next year. Or have we done something on climate change? Yeah. So basically, I know we are saying we want to do these cuts. And when you also look at it, we already had been complaining even in Parliament about equity. Yes, there were areas that you were not having any development projects or anything. Now that you're going to cut, does it mean that these places that didn't even have these projects are going to be cut further? Or like my colleague Millie Odhiambo said, there's going to be some equity and fair distribution of this cut across the whole country? Because I am sure that when I look at the list that we even have here on the public participation, it looks like mostly the areas that comes from the people who you are saying, for example, are supporting Gen Z, or that said no or rejected the issue of corruption. Because without that issue of corruption, and yet the PS, you're still alluding to the idea that people should be taxed. I didn't know, the people are not saying that they shouldn't be taxed. They're just saying don't overtax, because when you overtax, people don't give you tax anymore. They actually avoid giving that tax. So the issue is not that people don't want to pay tax, but don't look at revenue collection only as tax-based and putting higher taxes on the people. Asante sana. And my last question, sorry. On the road maintenance levy, which will generate about 32 billion, will this go to the exchequer, or is it going to the roads board?
Thank you very much.
I would like to have that answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ruth. Members, I'm not trying to control for us to comment, but to be very fair, because we've been sitting here for 4 days. We have project lists from all MDAs. In my opinion, we can take this debate in a different mode, because the housing was here in the morning, we had the list, so that we don't concentrate on one side, then we leave out very important issues which we need to engage with. Because looking at the issues where the money has been cut, that is number 5. Rectification, we know it was all constituencies. Roads project, GK actually was very forthright to come with a whole list. It was cutting across. So I'm just requesting so that we are able to give this session the weight it deserves by dealing with the issues that cuts across all the people of Kenya. If you allow, we take 3 more, they respond, then another round. Let me start with the Bishop's daughter.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, the Prime Cabinet Secretary and the team from Treasury, for your presentation. And I'm also happy that you're before this committee, not just as the acting CS Treasury, but also as the one who is charged with the responsibility of coordination and supervision of government and the state departments, because it will be very important after we pass this supplementary budget to actually follow up as the supervisor of the ministries whether they are doing the right thing. My question is this. My colleagues have talked about corruption, but I want to go further and say the Auditor General is doing a very good job under the circumstances as an office. Every quarter or every year, we have audit reports of how different government entities are spending their monies. I want to ask whether as a government we are taking keen interest on the audit reports, or there are just other reports, and what actions are being done. Because as we talk about budget cuts, we have to talk about corruption and wastage as one of the things that has brought us to where we are. So I wanted to ask about the audit reports, or they're just reports, both from the counties, Parliament, Judiciary, all the way to the executive. The second thing that I wanted to raise is the issue of recurrent. It is good that you have stated how much money is being rationalized in the recurrent budget. We did for Parliament this morning under PAC, Judiciary has done, and there is always a perception that there is a lot more at the executive in terms of recurrent. The beautiful flowers we see, the teas, they could be minimal, but it counts for something. The travel in these parastatals all over, people traveling for essential. There are meetings which are essential, where the country position maybe has to go and be represented. But just travels, even as members of parliament, we've ceded ground and we've said it's something that should be considered. So at the executive level, has that been really taken care of at the recurrent? And lastly, as you do your supervision, Kenyans are so keen. Please do not commit anything here in front of us and in front of Kenyans. And then, chini ya maji, people are still traveling, people are still doing the same things you have committed here, that it won't happen. They will be so keen to follow up to see that it is actually happening in those ministries and departments. To my second last issue, an issue like NHIF. Do we need to still move to shift, or you do reforms in NHIF? Because there are costs that will be incurred as you move to shift. Can we just do reforms of NHIF? Because the majority of it was working. So can we just, improve and make the reforms that we need at NHIF? The issue of communication, you have stated rightly. KRA and Treasury, you need to work on your communication in a language that Kenyans understand. Why we need to raise, why the taxes need to be raised in a certain manner, and as you're considerate also to Kenyans, but your communication is key. And finally, I don't understand why the president has 10 or 8 advisors on economics, and then Treasury is doing its own things at Treasury. Then some of your advisors are talking like they are not in the same government. They are even talking against you, Treasury. And you're wondering, are you working together? Are you, there could be a challenge and a problem between the advisors and Treasury, because I thought the main key person to advise the president on issues to do with economics is the cabinet secretary responsible with Treasury. Now you have some people who sit in air-conditioned offices who don't understand what Kenyans are going through, and then they are just talking in cross-purpose communication. And maybe that is where the big challenge in terms of Treasury and even the president, the issue is going. So as I conclude on the taxes, also you said Kenyans are resilient. Kenyans are resilient. They can even be looking for ways to circumvent paying taxes. That you think we are resilient, but the more you continue taxing us, and that is why the raising of taxes is not commensurate to how much we are getting, because Kenyans are just looking for ways of surviving under the tough circumstances. So we need to get a way to communicate and convince them why they should pay taxes and why they get value for the money of it. And as you tell us about the debts and everything, I think that should be public information. Audit your debts, tell us where we are, so that we understand and we move together. Don't just be telling us every other time we have loans to pay. Kenyans are asking which loans, what were they for, did we get value for money, and how much are we paying? Do for us simple, and we will understand and work with you.
Honorable Mashako.
Thank you, Chair. I like first to commend the National Treasury and the PCS for a good presentation. Chair, I have about 2 or 3 questions. One is, we know we have a very good tax policy that I think was launched last year. I just wanted to know from Treasury how that tax policy is influencing or is guiding the decisions to either tax Kenyans more or reduce the burden of taxation, or how is it informing even the finance bill that we had just recently. Why I say that, Chair? When Chair of Finance and Economic Planning Kimani Kuria came before this committee, he indicated that he wanted some budget under Treasury and KRA that will allow a study be done to show now the sensitivity of either higher taxes on revenue collection. And I would really want to know whether this has been done in the past, or it is this time that Treasury is waking up to realizing that more taxation does not necessarily mean additional revenue to the country. Because if that is the case, then we want to see that future finance bills or any attempt to tax Kenyans more may lead to a justification around a study that has been conducted, so that we are sure any additional tax burden will generate additional revenue. Because we know for a fact that last year, fuel levy, when we introduced taxes on fuel, we didn't raise enough revenue as anticipated. Tied to that, Chair, is that we have raised fuel levy from 18 to 25. And I just wanted to know, and a colleague of mine mentioned this, do we have a framework? Which laws are we going to use so that then the money that we raise under road maintenance levy fund would be used to fund our budget? Because there's an indication that that money that will be raised will help reduce will help fund the budget that we have today. Second, Chair, most of the departmental committees that have come before us have indicated that the departments and ministries they oversight are complaining that you have cut, not that they are complaining that you have cut their budgets, but they're complaining that you've cut so much, including employees, salaries and benefits, PE, personal emoluments. So I just wanted to hear from Treasury, when you cut across, are there departments that you feel you need to reinstate their PEs? I want to give you two examples. One is Kenya Film Board, that you've cut 55% of their, their personnel emoluments. Go to CDA, Coast Development Authority. You've equally cut 122 million shillings, that they're indicating that that part of that, 65 million of that, is purely salaries and allowances. Then allow me to say this, Chair, as a last comment, that as we look at auditing loans, public debt, I think it's important as a country we also include auditing budgets, including this year's budget, to understand how balanced we are trying to cover the country. By balance, I mean how skewed our budgets are. Because we look at the documents that have been presented before this budget committee, including projects that we see being done. You go to a county, you have 4 or 5 roads, yes, that are ongoing. You go to another county, no road, or only one. So I'm thinking of a situation whereby Treasury and maybe the government should institute a full audit of our budgets, maybe going back 5 years, to see where have you marginalized this country even more, where have you sent more money for, where have you, where has been the bias. So then as you move forward, we start a new Kenya that every part of this country benefits from these 3 and 4 trillion budgets. Thank you, Chair.
Members, let's please give the National Treasury some time to respond, then we take the last round. Karibu sana, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Your Excellency, you may answer the ones you want, but you are free also to designate to your team.
Yes, I'm sure they were listening very clearly, and I will go by your advice. Maybe I'll make my comments to touch on a little bit of what might be political concerns, and then the issue of some of the technical areas. My PS and his team can intervene on the various points. The first one, Mr. Chairman, it would be very bad policy if we tried to do cuts on the basis of how a member of parliament votes. That would be absolutely wrong. And I want to assure you that that is not to be anything that we want to adopt as a government. All Kenyans are taxpayers. And when they are in parliament, whether they vote yes or no, they are performing their constitutional and civic obligations, and therefore they cannot become victims of any penalization. So if there's any such thought, I would want to reassure the members that we will not subscribe to that. All Kenyans have a right, they're all taxpayers, and that is why we are here, so that we can look at our proposals. Mr. Chairman, I want to go further and commit that after we have finished with this presentation, in order to show that we have nothing to hide, the PS and his team are going to make sure that this document that we have used to make a presentation is made available to all the media houses. But beyond that, I actually advise that the Treasury buys space so that there's no distortion. I think the Treasury, and this is what we are going to do, we will buy space and have this document in all the leading papers of this country so that there is no deletion of a comma, no hiding of anything, so that Kenyans can see for themselves what it is, as it is. This is a very important thing because sometimes the communication is distorted and the facts are not laid out to the people. So we want to undertake to do that particular item. Let me touch very quickly on the issue around SHIF and NHIF. I believe Parliament has already pronounced itself on these particular items. I think the law regarding the social health insurance fund is in place. And the one on NHIF was repealed. Mr. Chairman, am I right? Yes. So I think what is important, we take into account what were the positives around the NHIF, and with the law that is in place, we then accelerate the process of ensuring that the targets or the objective of achieving universal health care is achieved, so that all Kenyans who deserve medical care can have their needs attended to under the Social Health Insurance Fund. And that is something that we are going to do. We've had a little bit of hiccups of people moving to court and slowing down the process. Sometimes, the truth be told, sometimes these interventions by people raising petitions to court are genuine. And sometimes they are petitions that sometimes are designed perhaps to slow down a process. But legally, we still have to address those when they are in court, and then we move ahead. So that is something that is moving. I want to also be able to state that on matters of tax policy, and I think KRA is in this room, they will be able to elaborate a little bit on matters tax policy. I think Mashako has spoken quite broadly on that. What I can only say is that tax policy and tax reform is continuous. There's a program that Treasury runs so that they have to continually look at the tax structure and the efficiency of the methods that have been employed and review them from time to time. Going back into history, if I may just give a quick example, because I was at the center of it when I was officially at the Treasury at that time. We moved away from the Income Tax Department, the Customs Department, and so forth, and created the KRA. And then the KRA became the first stage of reform moving forward. And maybe on a humorous note, one of the most interesting areas is that digitization that was being introduced was the famous PIN number. And there was so much resistance from Kenyans on this PIN number. They called it the number of the devil. Even it was being preached in churches by very prominent bishops that this is the number of the devil, that you're going to be identified by the number. But this was a strategy maybe conceived by people who want to evade tax, to try and stop you in the tracks so that you cannot digitize and you cannot reform, because the tax news will get closer to them. So even as we look at what we are going through in terms of tax policy, as we tighten the news, as efficiency, as digitization improves, you will find still there'll be elements who will want to resist, because where they were evading before, with digitization and modernization, you find that the door or the window is closing on some of them. So these are things that we would have to anticipate. I think the issue of the debts, I just want to say that there is a debt register actually at the Treasury, and I think you'll want to speak to it, which is public, and it gives details of who do we owe. It is there. I think what the members are looking at is the issue of creating the forensic audit around the debt profile, and to see whether we got value for money at the end of the day. That is a valid issue, but we have to do it procedurally, because it is important that, because constitutionally it's the Auditor General who can audit all government accounts. And therefore, if we want to have that forensic audit, it has to be channeled through the Office of the Auditor General. And if for some reason the Office of the Auditor General is unable to do it, maybe because of being overstretched, it is the Office of the Auditor General that can recommend the appointment of an audit firm to conduct such a forensic audit. That is how the procedure should be. And I believe this is something that we have not lost. It is something that can be picked up and taken up in the right direction. In part of the issues that we want to look at is we agree that there must be a better strategy around implementation of the findings of the audit reports. This has been an area of weakness, especially when it comes to tackling matters corruption. And this cascades not just at the national government level, but it cascades to the county governments, and it even cascades to the state enterprises. This is something that I think as a strategy of tackling corruption, I can only say that Parliament and the executive will need to work very closely together so that we can have a better strategy around implementation of audit reports. The issue of pending bills, this is a thorn in the flesh, and you have raised very valid questions. I will leave that to our technical people, because a committee to look at pending bills was set up by government, and about 70% of the 600 billion plus Kenya shillings of pending bills is primarily domiciled with the state corporations. They have even more in terms of pending bills than the national government itself. So that is an area where the committee that was set up has made some preliminary findings, and I'm sure the PS Treasury will be able to to say something towards that. On a broad scale, it is true when government does not spend, as Honorable Aseka did indicate, economic activity is subdued. So we are alive to the fact that we need to take urgent measures and quick corrective action so that the government does not lose the momentum that it had gained in process of trying to get the economy back on the recovery path. So that is a reality. But I want to tell members that we have really cut to the bone. We have cut to the bone. The negative side of the tax, when you don't have tax, then your only recourse now becomes cutting expenditure. So we are trying to do a very delicate balance between not living without the Finance Act, but also trying to figure out how the government can still have its operations with the bare minimum. I want to say that the Finance Act, to Honorable David Ucheng, this was an act generated by the executive. And I think the executive has taken full responsibility. That is the government of Kenya. They've taken full responsibility that this was their way of trying to help in graduating the country from high dependency on borrowed money to improving our local capacity to generate revenue. But the Kenyan citizens had a different position on this matter. So we have to step back and retrace our steps. But it's also important for Kenyans to note that somewhere along the line, not necessarily now, as the population grows, as needs of citizens grow and so forth, and as we look forward to moving away from high debt dependency, it will be important that going forward, we appreciate that there will be need to have increased revenues from time to time. But it's a question of whether we can have proper public participation at every level so that everybody understands why we are looking for that extra resource, and then we deal with it. There are issues of corruption which are valid, and I know broadly in the program that we want to pursue, part of issues even around tax modernization and sealing of loopholes, it's all an attempt to make sure that we can minimize aspects of tax evasion, for instance. We want to look critically at procurement, because procurement, ladies and gentlemen, is the fulcrum of corruption. That is where it all stems from. And we are in the process through Treasury, and some may require amendments that will come to the floor of the House, that the aspects around procurement be relooked at, be digitized, so that there is minimal contact between individuals. We want to appeal that this House will be you passed the conflict of benefits, conflict of interest bill. I think that was very, very important. Of course, Senate has had its bite at the cherry, and then it will go to the President. But what is important is that those are some of the kind of legislation that are so critical, and I think we will owe it to Kenyans to to make sure that we do not mutilate that bill, so that aspects around conflict of interest can also be dealt with, because this is, as I said, it becomes a fulcrum on matters corruption. So that is a